And so that's what it really is about. Can we give on some issues? Can they give on some issues? Can we come to a peaceful resolution of this so we're not fighting this battle every year?
That was Governor Spencer Cox talking about the Department of the Interior and how Deb Haaland, who will probably lead the department, will look at the Bears Ears National Monument. Welcome to our In Focus discussion tonight. We want to explore, why does the head of the Department of the Interior matter so much to Utah? Well, 65% of Utah's lands are under federal control. Most of that is BLM land and national forests. National parks and monuments also make up part of that federally designated land. All of that is managed by the Department of the Interior. So what can we expect from Deb Haaland, who is presumed to become the new head of the agency? Joining us now is Ethel Branch, the former Attorney General for Navajo Nation and a longtime family friend of Representative Haaland. Ethel, thank you so much for making time tonight and joining us on the show.
Thanks. It's a pleasure to be here.
Ethel, we briefly mentioned this earlier. Tell us about the personal relationship that you have with Representative Haaland.
Sure. She was my tutor at the Pre-Law Summer Institute at the University of New Mexico, which is sort of like a crash course in law school that Native students can enroll in the summer before they matriculate. And she was just this phenomenal role model for me. And was someone I thought about when I struggled at times in law school because she was such an inspiration. You know, she was a single mother supporting her child as she went through law school and, you know, working extremely long hours to make sure she was making the grades and also providing for her daughter. And she's also actually an avid distance runner. And so, you know, on top of all of that, being a marathon runner, she was just such an exceptional role model for me. And, you know, during that time, we came to learn that my oldest sister was best friends with her aunt. She's actually from Winslow, which is where my family's from. Was where I graduated from high school. And so that was kind of a fun added bonus.
Honestly, in my opinion, both of you are inspiring role models, not just to the indigenous population, but everyone as well. Let's talk about what she's done as a representative of New Mexico. How do you think that's going to play into her approach to the Department of the Interior?
Yeah, I think Deb has done so much. She comes from such a genuine place of not only intimate knowledge of the challenges in Indian country, both from personal experience, but also from the legal perspective. And then she also, you know, she's done this incredible job of bringing what is typically invisible issues relating to Indian country into the light. For example, with the legislation on missing and murdered Indigenous women. And so I'm really hopeful that she's going to do more of that. And really, really hopeful that she is going to usher in a new era of Indian policy. You know, the Biden administration is all about build back better, but in Indian country, you need to do the initial build. And I think Deborah understands that in a way that no other Secretary of Interior has understood that. So I hope that she's going to work really hard to bring an infusion of critical capital infrastructure to Indian country, because for too long, our First Peoples have been the last peoples in this country when it comes to healthcare, access to clean running water, access to electricity, you know, you name it, proximity to Superfund sites. So I'm really, really hopeful about Deb's administration. She also takes climate change very seriously. That's an issue that presents an existential challenge to Indian nations. And so I'm really hopeful that she's going to take bold measures to ensure that Indigenous peoples continue to survive, because that truly is an existential threat in the same way that COVID-19 is presently. And so I very much hope, you know, the Pueblos have been extremely hard hit. Navajo Nation has been, all Indian tribes have been hard hit by COVID. And so I hope Deb is going to make that her priority first thing when she comes in, along with climate change.
Ethel, we have about a minute left in our segment. My next question for you is: the Department of the Interior has a troubled history with Native Americans. The Bureau of did we lose Ethel? Production team, did we lose Ethel? Okay. All right, Ethel, if you can hear me, let me repeat that question for you. So the Department of the Interior has a troubled history with Native Americans. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, which is under the department, has been used as a culture killer against Native Americans. In that context, what does it mean to have a Native person heading the department?
You know, for so long, this country has struggled with its history and has tried to keep us, hidden from the world, as well as our fellow citizens, because of that troubled history. And, that's really a colonial model. And so I think Deb, being an Indigenous person, is going to help us as a country move away from that sort of approach and recognize the humanity of Indigenous peoples and our inherent sovereign rights to exist indefinitely. So I'm really hopeful about that incredible transition. I'm hopeful she's going to usher in an era of healing. I hope that she has truth and reconciliation on her agenda as well. Too many of our people in this country don't know the history of Indigenous peoples, and they don't know about the challenges that we face in Indian country. So I'm very hopeful there's going to be a lot of public education and healing in Indian country and in this country in general.
You've been hearing from Ethel Branch, the former Attorney General for Navajo Nation and a longtime family friend of Representative Haaland. Ethel, thank you so much for being here tonight. It was great to hear from you.
Thanks so much, Rosie.
They need to be heard. It's important to hear their voice because they'll be much more affected than people living in Washington, D.C. who were involved in the immediate decision making.
That was Senator Mike Lee in 2016, talking about how Utahns living near Bears Ears National Monument should be listened to when considering the borders. Thanks for staying with us for our second In Focus discussion tonight on Deb Haaland and Bears Ears. Earlier today, we spoke to Representative John Curtis, whose district covers Bears Ears National Monument, on what Utah's delegation in Washington, D.C. thinks will happen with federal lands.
Representative Curtis, thank you so much for joining us today. First off, I'd like to start the interview by asking you, what do you think of the choice to select Representative Deb Haaland to lead the Department of the Interior?
I'm really fortunate. I served on natural resources with her, and she was actually the chair, and I was the ranking member of the Public Lands Subcommittee. So I've had a chance to work with her. We actually spoke just yesterday via Zoom about the Bears Ears situation. She's very accessible, and looking forward to hearing the questions in the Senate and hearing her responses. I think one of the most important things to Utah is her accessibility and her willingness to listen.
Both Bears Ears and Grand Staircase National Monuments were created under the Antiquities Act. They were then downsized. Let's talk about the borders. In your mind, what are the main considerations on how the borders should be determined?
So Bears Ears presents a real challenge with borders, simply the vast amount of land involved in this. And a lot of times people think about this as if maybe it's a Zion National Park or Arches that's just contained in a nice, neat little area. And the reality is you go over hundreds of thousands of acres where you've got these antiquities and these beautiful views and vistas, and then other things as well, such as extraction. And it makes the borders very, very difficult in the Bears Ears area. And more likely than not, a final solution, I think if it's really the best solution, it will realize that there's different categories of land, and some should be under the highest protection, and some should allow recreation, for instance, and some should allow agriculture. And getting in and really studying what needs to be protected and preserved is really a challenge in this particular area.
Who do you feel are the most important voices in determining where the borders of the monuments should be?
So this is a tough one, right? Everybody feels like they should be the voice that's heard. And clearly there are many very, very, very important voices. We can't neglect the Native Americans and their role in this and their voice. At the same time, we can't neglect the voice of the settlers. Too often we approach these issues as if one side gets to win everything and everybody else has to lose everything. And the reality of it is we can find a cross-section between the many voices here where they can feel like they were listened to and their needs were met. I'm confident we can do that.
Emails from former Secretary Zinke show that the downsizing had a lot to do with coal and oil resources. Let's talk about that. Do you think the process to change the borders was more about money?
Absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, if you actually go back to what's alleged as emails, you'll find that there were some emails sent by some interest with oil, but you can't find anywhere that Secretary Zinke listened to that or that he was influenced by that. I've spent more time as an elected official in this area than most, and I know it's far deeper than that. There's a lot more issues that are more relevant than that, and that, in my opinion, played a very, very small influence in this decision, if any at all.
What do you think is the main driver to the passions that come out over these federal lands in Utah? Is it a distrust of Washington, D.C.? Is it local control? Why is this so contentious?
Well, you're right to use the word passions, and everybody on all sides. There are a lot of passions in this. And answering that question is a little bit like going back and trying to figure out why a 5-generation feud is still going on, right? It's like over time, so many feelings have been hurt and trust has been abused so many times that it's very problematic. I will just tell you there are many, many layers to this. It's far deeper than just a mistrust of the federal government. It's far deeper than what most people see on the surface. One of the things I think is too often overlooked is the economic impact of a monument designation and how it threatens livelihoods and people worrying about how they'll be able to provide for their families, and perhaps more important, how can their children stay in the area and have jobs. And I think we make a mistake when we overlook any of these areas that are part of the passions.
Senator Lee and Senator Romney are pushing for a bill to block presidents from creating or expanding national monuments in Utah. Do you support this? And if so, why should Utah be exempt from the national monument designation?
Well, I think we have to look at how the Antiquities Act is used. And I think all of us can see a role of it in the early history of America where these areas were undiscovered. But let's face it, there's nothing undiscovered in Utah. We all know what it is. And finding resolution to how these lands should be treated should be done through Congress after very, very careful negotiation with all sides. You can't get anything through Congress unless you can get people to agree, and that's the way it should be done. Now, the Antiquities Act is a presidential declaration that just says one side gets to win and everybody else gets to lose. And you can see why that's caused so many problems here in Utah. So clearly, yes, I do support their efforts, but at the same time, I support efforts to find the solutions for these public lands that are so valuable and need to be taken care of. But let's do it through consensus building. Let's do it through legislation and not through the Antiquities Act.
Do you think the borders will finally be settled? And what's to stop the borders from being moved again?
This is a perfect question. There's only one answer to that, and that's congressional legislation. If a president does this, it's this one-sided presidential declaration that can be changed by a following president. If we can get this through legislation, it means that we've found consensus, and that is the only lasting answer to these public lands questions. Can we find the consensus, and then let's get legislation around it, and we can once and for all solve these very, very difficult issues.
Representative Curtis, thank you so much for making time and joining us tonight. It was good to catch up with you. Have a good rest of your night.
Thanks, you too. Bye-bye now.
We are all united in our opposition to H.R. 4532. We oppose H.R. 4532 as there was no consultation with the Indian tribes. As in the past, the United States government desires to come into Indian country and tell American Indians what is in their best interest.
That was the chairman of Utah Tribal Leaders in 2018, talking about how Native Americans were overlooked during the discussion on the borders of the National Monument. Welcome to our third and final In Focus discussion tonight on Deb Haaland and Bears Ears National Monument. Joining us now is Clark Tenakhongva, Vice Chair of the Hopi Tribe. Vice Chair, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Good evening.
Let's start off with Representative Deb Haaland being the choice to lead the Department of the Interior. What's your response to this nomination?
It brings great joy to the Hopi tribe as one nation to say that, one of our Pueblo leaders has been selected and nominated to lead this great program up there, the Department of the Interior there in Washington D.C. And no time in America's history has this ever been done. So we hope that with the selection that's been made, she will be selected to that post, that she will have a better understanding of the needs of all of Native America, not just the Southwest.
Why do you think the topic of Bears Ears National Monument is so contentious?
Well, it's always a contentious issue when it comes to land. And in this case, unfortunately, as what's been discussed earlier, a lot of it has been based on the non-native history of how this land was settled and what it was made. It's always been without the consultation of many Native American tribes. In this case, out here in the Southwest, we have 5 coalition tribes that have band together to try to make a protection for this permanent structures out there in Bears Ears, what we call Bears Ears. In Hopi, we call it Honmuja, which means bear berm. But yet, at the same time, has there ever been consultation with Native American tribes? I don't believe so. There's been many treaties that have been made, and how many of the treaties have ever been honored? And in this case, I believe that there's been a lot of rhetoric or talk saying that America was made on the backs of a lot of slavery and other minorities. I believe, in my opinion, America was made on the back of Native Americans.
Where do you think the borders need to be for Bears Ears National Monument? Should they be moved back to the original designation or somewhere else?
I would prefer they be considered that they be back to the 1.9, or if nothing else, 1.3. Although there are many other structures within the ideas of the Bears Ears, it expands far beyond what was originally proclaimed as the national monument in the 1.3. But yet currently, right now, only less than 75% of it is under what is considered the Trump administration's proclamation.
What do you make of the economic argument of jobs and industry having a right to federal lands as it relates to the size of the monument?
One thing I have thought about over the last couple of days is that if we're talking about jobs and economy, then we must not forget about the other indigenous people that reside there. What is in their backyards? You've got a milling mine that's right there with uranium, which contaminates the whole area right there. And I was listening to NPR today, and it stated that nowhere in America, in anybody else's land, prime land, do you put contamination. And this is a prime example of what's going on. It doesn't matter to other people that don't have any real history tied to Bears Ears. It does not matter if there's uranium mining, oil drilling, and whatnot to go on there. In my opinion, that is total disrespect for who was here first. That is part of our history, and I say many times is that many of the Kiva structures are there. That's a big symbolism for all Native American tribes, not just only Hopi or Pueblo, but it's a symbol just like many of the churches that dot this land throughout this country.
Vice Chair, we have about a minute left. Another issue that the opposition talks about is government overreach, that the federal government shouldn't be controlling lands in Utah. How does that make you feel?
I guess being a Native American confined to a reservation, I think it's about time that, we start talking business here. We've been confined to a certain amount of acreages on all these reservations, but yet, who was here first? Who occupied the lands first? But yet, that's, again, if you're talking about overreach, that's what has happened to all Native American tribes. Some tribes don't even occupy the same homelands that they did. So in this case, it needs to be a better understanding as far as what can we come together as far as a resolution, solution, and understanding that I think everybody should benefit from it, not just only for the protection of the area, but yet considering who is there now. Yes, I do respect non-Native Americans, but yet at the same time, we have to see eye to eye and learn how to respect one another as one nation. We're all under this one nation. There is no difference as far as color or anything like that. That's the way I see it. We all bleed the same red blood, and we need to start working in unison towards a better goal, so we set a better example for the betterment of this country and the globe.
I think we are looking forward to the future and what could possibly come out from Representative Haaland being a voice at the table now. You've been hearing from Clark Tenakhongva, Vice Chair of the Hopi tribe. Vice Chair, thank you so much for taking time to be with us tonight. It was great to have your voice in this conversation.
Thank you for having me on, and again, I wish you all well out there.